What is the most WTF thing you've experienced seen during a flight? I was once on a flight with a steward who was an extremely flaming douchebag. Every time someone asked him to do anything you could tell he was pissed off and gave them attitude. He didn't say anything but he would let out sighs or look around as if to say, "Is this guy serious? How dare he ask me to do something for him?" About 3 hours into the flight someone was able to tape a "Kick me" sign onto his back. He then walked around the airplane for the next half hour while people behind him were snickering the whole time. It was hilarious. Even the other crew members on the plane were laughing at him when he couldn't see them. Eventually some old lady ruined everyone's fun and told him about it. He looked furious. Stupid old people always ruining everyone's fun. Not on a plane, but in the security line. About 6 years back, while about 10 people in front of my family in the line, a guy runs past the metal detector. It goes off. He doesn't stop. I couldn't tell what one of the security men yelled, but he yelled it 3 times. Instead of stopping the guy, all the guards and people behind the desks run into 2 rooms and close the doors, leaving all us passengers standing there freaking the fuck out. A minute or 2 pass. A ding goes over the PA system. Everyone comes out of the rooms. PA system says thanks for being cooperative during our drill. And have a nice day. Double quote. TLDR. Apparently the drill is to leave all the passengers to die while the staff remains safe at airport check-ins. I was on a flight from the East Coast to Arizona. In the middle of the flight the pilot gets on the intercom and is like, "Is anyone a doctor on the plane?" There was a lady like 3 rows up from me on the right section who had an oxygen tank and her family is all around her. I didn't think anything of it since it just seemed like she was just sick. 20 minutes later, the pilot gets on the intercom and is like, "We are diverting and making a stop in Denver." We land in Denver probably going 600 miles an hour. I have never gotten to the gate that fast in my life. After the door opened there was police, firefighters, EMT, you name it. You couldn't really see what was going on since there was so much commotion. I remember the family got off the plane with the lady. I specifically remember the look on passenger on my right when she looked out the window and saw there was a white sheet over the woman that was 3 rows up. She died on the plane. So you wonder if someone dies on a plane what happens? They land the plane, get the body off the plane and do some paperwork and you are on your way in 30 minutes. The kicker to the story is in Denver it was during spring break so they had a lot of overbooked passengers. The pilot gets on the intercom and says they are letting people from Denver board the plane since we had a few empty seats, mind you we were coming from the East Coast. Sure enough a lady sat down in the same seat that the woman just died in. They didn't even clean IT. I could not believe IT. I was in awe for the rest of the flight. I was thinking about telling the woman after the flight that someone died in her seat 20 minutes before, but I figured if that was me, I wouldn't want to know. On a flight from Minneapolis to LA, I had quite a terrifying experience. I was sitting next to an elderly man who, partway through the flight, needed to use the restrooms. I moved aside and watched as he walked to the front of the plane attempting to find the restrooms. As he reached the front of the plane, I noticed he wasn't exactly headed towards the restrooms. Rather he was headed toward the front exit door. Horrified as I was, he began to attempt to open the front exit at 34,000 feet. He began to pull down on the lever to release the door when a flight attendant ran over to him and stopped him. She kindly redirected him towards the restrooms. A United flight from LA to DC. The flight was a continuing flight from Mexico City, but with a new flight crew. Drink cart came out, and an overly blonde flight attendant asked what we wanted. We ordered, and she moved past us a bit and asked the people behind us what they wanted. The woman answered in Spanish, and before her adult son next to her could translate, the far snapped, "English. This is America. We speak English. I won't give you anything unless you ask for it in English." Everyone went fun, except my husband, who pulled his headphones off and said loudly to me, "What the fuck? Did she just tell that woman to speak in English because it's America? That's fucking ridiculous. Did that really just happen? He continued on for a bit. And the files went mute and tried to get the cart down to the back as quickly as they could. They didn't give our row the time of day the rest of the flight. And yes, as we got off he made a big deal about getting her name and he called United. Close bracket. I had just got out of prison and was on my way home. I had just found out that my wife, who waited for me the whole time I was in prison, had just died in car accident right before I was due to be released. So I'm on the plane and this creepy old guy in a pale suit keeps talking to me like he knows me. He keeps trying to offer me a job but he won't tell me anything about what he actually does. Or even his real name. But he knew my name. And he knew things about me that he couldn't have known. Anyway, our plane was grounded by a storm and I ditched the guy because he was creeping me out. Got off and decided to rent a car and drive the rest of the way home. I know he didn't get off the plane because he was sleeping when I left. And I watched. Nobody else got off the plane after me. On my way home, I randomly stop in some town to get something to eat at a bar. And who is there waiting for me? That same creepy old man. You can't explain that. I ended up sitting next to some cougar in first class where she proceeded to take advantage of the free drink and get completely smashed and hit on me heavily. She even got up during takeoff to use the restroom. She was basically climbing up the aisle since the plane was still ascending. 2 minutes later, she comes back with significantly more cleavage. It was so awkward. I tried my hardest to just listen to music and look out the window. She eventually moved on and got into this loud political debate with the people in the back row. Then this obese, flamboyant gay man in front of me angrily gets up out of his seat, turns around, gets into the aisle. He proclaims loudly in the most lispy voice I've ever heard. Hello, lady. This is not a public debate. Would you please shut up as some of us are trying to sleep? Double quote. She then silently sat back down. It was awesome. Years ago. Flying from Dallas. Woman in the seat behind me has a screaming kid with her. I put on noise cancelling headphones and turn up the volume. All is improved until I smell something truly gagging. For unknown reasons I pull the headphones off just in time to hear her ask the brat, "Make a little mud?" Double quote. I know Texas has some quaint phrases, but that one was the understatement of the decade. The kid had filled its diaper in the plane with some really toxic shit odor. I'd like to tell you she took the child to the bathroom and cleaned up. But, like the screaming, she didn't mind and the rest of us didn't matter. A flight back from Hawaii, the row in front of me contained a bearded guy who looked about 40 and a Japanese woman who looked about 60. It was dark and the cabin lights were off. They began chatting. Soon I noticed that they were each leaning in toward the unoccupied middle seat and sort of whispering. I heard her say, "But I'm married," a bunch of times. She showed him her ring and he took her hand in his. They fondled each other's hands for a while. Occasionally she'd scold him and they'd talk some more. But soon they were fondling hands again. I hear her say, "But I don't know you." Soon the guy took out his driver's license and gave it to her to inspect, which she did for upwards of 10 minutes. When she was done he leaned in for a kiss. They made out for a while, about 40 minutes, and they stopped BC. She once again said that she was married, though this time she said it with a tiny bit of a smile. Her heart was clearly pounding. There was an electricity that overtook her. He was magnetized and focused on her every movement. When the plane landed they both rushed off together down the aisle toward the exit. The guy was on my next flight and I noticed that when he boarded the plane he had a red rose with him. The woman was nowhere to be seen. I was on a flight from Toronto to Thunder Bay, Ontario back in 2009. We were halfway there and flying near Sault Ste. Marie. And it was nighttime. I'm looking out my window and I see aircraft lights way off in the distance, getting bigger. I ask the guy next to me to look out the window and tell me if I'm crazy. But nope. He sees them too. We're flying at 30,000 feet. And we both watch as slowly the lights get bigger and bigger. It's a jet. And it's coming right for us. Neither of us truly believe it's gonna hit. I mean, the ATC can't be that stupid, right? After a few seconds, I'm not so sure. And I grit my teeth. The plane gets close enough to ours that I can see into its cabin windows. And it flies directly beneath us. Less than 500 feet for sure. The turbulence of it flying below us shakes our plane. Neither the captain nor flight attendants never mention a thing. Freaked me right the hell out. Not sure it was WTF. But it was amusing. As soon as seatbelt's light went off, this businessman grabs his bag and off to the toilet he goes. Comes back a few minutes later wearing silk pyjamas and slippers. Has his suit in a garment bag. Gives it to stewardess who goes to hang it up. He puts on eye mask and off to sleep he went for the whole flight. 6 hours. Wakes up, reverses procedure. Nice suit. Pressed shirt from his bag and such. I was kind of jealous. I'd love to be able to sleep in a plane like that. On a flight from London to Berlin, me and my wife were the only passengers on board. It was kind of awesome. The flight attendants were in a wicked mood and loaded us up with drinks, and the pilot addressed us by name on all announcements. Halfway through the flight the plane's engines went dead silent and the flight attendant got a worried look on her face and said, "I fucking hate it when they do this." I wasn't really sure what was going on, but we figured the plane was gliding or something. I've never heard a plane be that quiet before. Anyways, we got insanely drunk and partied with one of the attendants later that night at Berghain Panorama Bar. Good times. A flight from Belfast to Birmingham. A lady boards after I was seated and asks if I would hold her baby whilst she got settled in. I said okay. A few minutes pass and the mother doesn't return. I call for a flight attendant who brings one of those orange belts and tells me to strap the baby onto me as they would be taking off soon. I protest quite loudly, "This is not my baby. It belongs to some woman back there." The FA insists I strap it in. After claiming that I was the dad and was trying to plan the baby off onto my wife, I spend the flight attached to a strange baby and with a sore neck as I kept looking round for the mother. Upon landing I see the lady chatting with the FAs and it becomes clear that she works for the airline. She had placed an airline ID badge around her neck, so that's how I knew. She takes the baby from me and sarcastically thanks me for offering to look after him. Not knowing what else to say, I lied and told her that I was the worst person to pull that stunt on, as I was a social worker and that she would be getting a home visit pretty soon. Her face went a bit white at that point. I did actually call Birmingham Social Services to report the incident, but I never heard back from them. A few years ago, me and a few friends were flying from London to NY. When we were about to land, it was completely dark outside. And at this point we were pretty sleep deprived and kind of nervous. Never having been to the US before. Anyway, the in-plane lights are turned off and the plane lands. As the plane comes to a halt on the runway, we notice a weird orange flickering glow illuminating the inside of the plane through the right-hand windows. Everyone looks out. And there's a wrecked airplane in the center of a huge fucking fire right next to us on the runway. The aircrew flat out ignored it and acted as if nothing was wrong. And we never found out what the hell happened. In the state of mind we were in, it was a very surreal experience. My mom was a flight attendant and had lots of crazy stories. One time, she was serving drinks and a passenger looks at her and says nervously, "The engine is on fire." My mom looked out the window and the engine was really on fire. She calmly told the man she will speak to the pilot. Really? She was shitting bricks. She goes into the cabin and tells the pilot the engine is on fire. The pilot looks at it, says, "It's okay. Just excess fuel burning up." To this day, my mother doesn't know if he was telling the truth. And quite frankly, doesn't want to know. A fake sense of security is better than no sense of security. My uncle is a mountain climber. He summited Everest a few years ago, and a couple months ago was climbing St. Elbrus in Russia. He summits Street Elbrus successfully and goes to the Moscow airport to fly back to Canada. After everyone had boarded the plane, a Chechnya man runs to the front and tells everyone that he has a bomb attached to him that he will blow up unless the Russian government lets Chechnya prisoners go. My uncle is at the back of the plane confused as to what is going on because he only speaks English. After 5 hours many people had fainted because the plane was not on and therefore air conditioning was not on. This was during a heat wave also. So the terrorist allows doctors to come aboard to help the sick people. However, instead of doctors it was the Russian equivalent of a SWAT team that kicked the living shit out of the man. After this everyone was deplaned and my uncle was stuck in the airport for an additional 16 hours being questioned by the Russian officials, without being allowed to call the Canadian embassy. And the airport didn't call the embassy either. He eventually came home with this sick story. TLDR. My uncle was on a Russian plane when a Chechenian terrorist held the plane hostage for 5 hours. Long time lurker and I finally have something to post. So here goes. I was on a flight back to Pittsburgh from LA. In coach of course. I board the plane. Sit down and I noticed 2 nurses helping an elderly woman into the seat directly in front of me. She was in a wheelchair and looked to have suffered a pretty bad stroke. About 30 minutes outside of Pittsburgh the woman shit herself. And the smell was god awful. Then the nurses get up and actually changed her fucking diaper right in front of me. The smell instantly doubled when it hit the air and it was at that point I actually prayed to God to knock that fucking plane out of sky and end it. Which he didn't, as I imagine he was laughing his ass off. A red eye from SLC. A young mother sits in the aisle seat with her infant in the row I'm in. She's chunky and hippie-ish and pleasant enough. The seat between us was then filled by another mother. This one easily in her 80s. Who was traveling with a dozen of her grandchildren GRT grandchildren, Mormons. Of course everyone within sight of an infant immediately feels anxiety at the prospect of an overnighter with a child who is sure to wail non-stop. So we take off. And the young mother proceeds to envelope her baby, holding the child close in against her ample bosom and curling over him and cooing and talking softly. This goes on for at least 4 hours. And the baby barely makes a peep. Maybe once it starts to get upset and the mother redoubles her efforts and the baby settles down again. At the end of the flight, the mother receives accolades for her baby handling skills from nearly every passenger around her. TL. Doctor, I took a 4-hour red-eye with an infant in my row. And said infant never cried or otherwise disturbed another passenger for the flight's duration. Best comment of the day. I was hanging out with a friend from high school who was a fairly devout Christian. I'm not Christian, but that was never an issue in our friendship. We went to our local gas station to buy snacks, and in the parking spot closest to the door was a red car with 666 written on the hood, roof, back bumper, and both doors. My friend is visibly uncomfortable, so we go inside. Immediately we see a tall, bulky, tatted up man, probably late 40s-early 50s, looked like a Hells Angels kinda person. My friend whispers to me, "You think he's the owner of that car?" I subtly nod and we move away. We can hear him arguing with the owner, whom I'm on a first name basis with, and is an extremely nice man, but we can't make out much. Suddenly we hear a punt on the counter and a very angry gruff smoker voice say, "What do you mean you don't have it?" We look over to see what's going on. The man seems super pissed, but the owner is keeping his cool and calmly says, "I'm sorry sir, we are out right now." I will never forget the next words out of the tough guy's mouth. "I want my crunchy peanuts." He yells this with another pound on the counter, storms out empty-handed mumbling about crunchy peanuts, and, sure enough, gets into the 666 car and drives off. As soon as he was out the door, my friend and I burst out laughing at how ridiculous the entire encounter was.